In this screencast, we're going to take a look at different types of parenting styles. And parenting is basically the toughest job that anybody can ever do, and usually people don't have a whole lot of practice at it before they actually start. So it's a very difficult thing, and over the years, we've tried to figure out what is the best parenting style to use with different children. And so, a woman by the name of Diana Baumrein, she did research years ago in terms of studying parents and their children, and she essentially, kind of defined certain parents to be what she called authoritarian parents, others as permissive, others as authoritative. And then, based on her research and what she saw in the interactions with the kids, she came up with a theory that, she believes kind of divides parenting into three different types. So let's take a look at those real quick. Authoritarian parents, let's talk about them first. The authoritarian parent basically attempts to shape, control, and they tend to evaluate the behavior and the attitudes of the child. Every single thing that the child does is basically controlled by the parent. The parent sets a standard of conduct, and usually it's an absolute standard. There's no give or take to it. The child has to meet those standards. They value obedience within the children, and they basically believe in keeping children kind of in their place. Authoritarian parents do not believe that parents and children are equal. The parents definitely, have the upper hand, and they believe that the child needs to understand that. They don't give or they don't encourage a lot of give and take with the child. So basically, they believe that the child should accept whatever the parent says, and that's kind of the final say. Now, what did Bromrine feel, or what did she see basically in those children? Children of an authoritarian parent. For the most part, she saw that most of those kids do well in school. Um, Maybe it's because, again, they feel like they have to. They have a lot of demands that they have to meet to get the parent approval. The children are not likely to engage in a variety of antisocial activities, things like drug and alcohol abuse and vandalism. They don't tend to get involved in those things. However, these children a lot of times are very anxious. They have anxiety issues sometimes. Sometimes they're withdrawn and tend to have somewhat, at least she believes, an unhappy disposition. They don't feel fulfilled in living life the way they are. They also have very poor reactions to frustration. Girls, in particular, if they experience a lot of frustration, well, then they're very likely to give up pretty quickly. Boys, a lot of times, if they're in a struggle or trying to do something and it's not working out, a lot of times boys will become hostile. Now, that's the authoritarian parents that we're looking at. Let's take a look at what Baumrein basically calls the permissive parent. And the permissive parent, I think, is pretty easy to remember because it's basically permitting the child to do whatever they want. There's not much punishment whatsoever. The parents put very few demands on the child as far as household responsibilities or really anything that they need to live up to. The child is allowed to kind of regulate their own activities as much as possible, and again, the parent kind of stays out of the way. Basically, they'll be there as kind of a resource for the child, but they don't like to put a lot of control over the child. In many cases, they kind of view the child as a friend, and they don't necessarily view the child as someone that they can kind of control. Um, so that's kind of the permissive parent. Now, what does Baumrein see in those children? In the children of permissive parents, she sees a lot of emotional issues. For example, these kids tend to have difficulty with emotions, especially if they are like in a situation where they're not getting what they're used to getting. If there's a rule that they have to obey that they're not used to obeying and things like that, they get very upset by that. A lot of times they become very rebellious. They can anyway become very defiant when they're challenged. They don't tend to do well when they're challenged as far as tasks go. Like if they're up against something very difficult, they don't stick at it very long before they eventually just kind of give up. And this is the group of children that Diana Baumrein believes have a lot more antisocial behaviors. So they may get involved in a few things like drinking or alcohol or things of that nature. Now, the last style of parenting, and obviously the one that she considers the best, is the authoritative parent. Now, authoritative parents, they like to direct the child's activities, but they do it in kind of a rational, situation by situation manner. So they believe in a lot of give and take with the child. They believe that they are, the one that's supposed to take care of making decisions and things like that for the child, but they allow the child to interact and to have a say in those decisions. So it's definitely different from what we call the authoritarian. The authoritative, um, they basically value the child having a little bit of self will and the idea that they can make decisions and that they can feel comfortable making those decisions. And they also value a little bit of conformity when it's necessary. So it's kind of like they get across to their children that there are times that you can kind of discuss and maybe uh, you know decide to change a rule here and there, but then there may be certain times when you have to conform. So authoritative parents tend to set standards for the child's future conduct, and again, they use a lot of reason behind it, but they also tend to shape the child's behavior with a lot of reinforcement techniques. Now, what does she see in those children? Well, she tends to notice that those children tend to be a little bit more lively. They tend to have a very high or a very happy disposition. They tend to be very self confident about what they can do, and especially when they're confronted with like a difficult task, they go after it. They stick after it. They know also that if they need, they've got a parent in their corner who will be willing to help them and maybe give them advice, that sort of thing. These kids tend to be better emotionally balanced than a lot of the other kids in the other two categories. So, and they develop very good social skills, so they tend to get along well with a variety of people. Now, what do we need to know about this? We really need to make sure that we remember the three parenting styles, okay? Permissive parents, again, I say that's the easiest one to remember because permissive parents permit the child to do anything. But authoritarian and authoritative, people get those mixed up all the time. So we got to figure out a way to remember those. And here's what I would suggest. Try to remember kind of a little mnemonic device here. Authoritarian, the word authoritarian ends the same way as vegetarian. And a vegetarian is very strict about what they eat and what they don't eat. Well, authoritarian parents tend to be very strict with their children. Authoritative ends in the same way as cooperative. Authoritative parents tend to be very cooperative with their child. So if you can just kind of remember that little mnemonic device, vegetarian and cooperative, that helps you to remember authoritarian and authoritative.